Thanks. We're really lucky to have both Zita Cobb and Roger Bundschuh here today, and thank you guys for traveling here today and getting here okay, and missing the rain somehow. So first, a couple questions. How important is the place we were born, or the place that we say we're from? How can we shape our living environment? What do we envision for the future? So quick little background on each of them. So Zita Cobb was born on Fogo Island, which is a remote island off the northeast coast of Newfoundland in Canada. And following a wildly successful career in the high technology industry, Zita returned to Fogo Island. And there she set up and founded the Shorefast Foundation, which, among all these other projects, is this private foundation that seeks to use art and culture under the aspect of sustainability. And with this, she's trying to sort of open up new perspectives for Fogo Island. And so a little bit of a background, and I know Zita will fill in a lot of the gaps that I'm surely producing here. So until the 1970s, the island lived from fishing, from cod fishing. And then this is until the cod stocks were basically wiped out by large-scale industrial fishing, and large sections of the population on the island moved to the mainland. So with Shorefast and with one of the projects with Shorefast is Fogo Island Arts. There's a sort of a scholarship program and various artist studios, these amazing studios, and I'm sure there's some photos of them. A few. And now there's the newly opened inn, the Fogo Island, 4 days ago? 2 days ago. Just opened 2 days ago, the Fogo Island Inn, and I'm sure Zita will also tell us lots about the inn. There's the foundation today networks international artists with the local population. And there's film projects involving the inhabitants of Fogo. There are cooperations between product designers and the indigenous craftspeople. All this sort of represents this agenda that it's set itself up to sort of try to halt the emigration from the island. And also of opening up sustainable sources of income. And you can see, I mean, with the inn as an example, one of the goals of the foundation is to create jobs. And the newly opened inn will be fully operated by a staff of 90-ish people, and they're all Fogo Island residents. And the profits from the inn are directly reinvested into the community. Now it's Roger's turn. Roger. So Roger Bundschuh grew up in France. He grew up in India, he grew up in the United States, and he grew up in Germany. He's an architect, and he's also a guest professor at the Bauhaus in Dessau. And specifically to sort of talk towards what you guys will be speaking to tonight. Among a number of his numerous projects as an architect in Berlin, he's been involved in this ongoing project that involves a series of designs and builds within the immediate environs of his architectural studio in Rosa Luxemburg Platz. And as part of this project, one of the things he did was, in 2007, designed and built a house made with a facade of black concrete, which now has become quite controversial to some. So Zita and Roger will talk about, and maybe argue about, places that have shaped their lives, and about how quality of life changes its meaning in various cultural contexts. They'll discuss the concept of Heimat, this uniquely German word, and of the differences between belonging and belonging to. So now I'll let you guys take over and, again, like I said, fill in the gaps that I surely missed. But thank you for being here.
Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you, Gareth.
So this is a kind of a continuation of a conversation Roger and I have been having for some time. And we'll probably be very old and we'll be having the same conversation. Actually, when Tomas Sedlacek was speaking, I was thinking that this whole economic mess we find ourselves in, I would argue it's partly because we suffer from an excess of wants And we've lost our immunity to the wants because I think we've lost place. And Roger is going to disagree with me, but for now, it's my turn.
Yes,
So, so I think maybe give you some context of the place that I'm talking about, and to give you a bit of a sense, I'm 54 years old, but I grew up on an island, off the coast of Canada. That's where this place is. And in some ways, it was a bit like growing up in a century that was 100 years earlier than what the rest of the world was experiencing. But I think in these kinds of places, there's a lot to learn. And so I think, and the economic models that have prevailed in this place for 400 years, I think have some applicability. So Thomas, I'm glad you're back. I just finished saying that I think that part of the problem is with all of these wants that we have is that we've lost place. So I'm going to try and make that point. Oh, we don't want to go that way. We want to go this way. Here we go. Hang on. So, there we go. The Newfoundland Outport. So these are fishing places. And all of these people who live here, so at the peak, this little island had 6,000 people. They own the house they live in, all the people, and they own the land the house is on. All the rest of the land is common property. And this is how I grew up. This is the island. 10 different little communities that are culturally actually quite different from each other. So you can see where it is in the North Atlantic Basin. We are only, if you can imagine, in the Labrador Current with icebergs going by, but we are only one degree of latitude further north from where we're sitting right now. Lots of history here that, now it's a very important place. So Thomas, when we're going to have this argument we're going to have about economics in place, we're going to have it here. This is one of the four corners of a flat earth. And I'd like to start with, maybe we can argue about whether it's really flat or not. And there's a good place to have it. Place for me, it's the only way I know how to experience history, because time lives for me in these places, because the stories of all of us that came before are in this place. And so people fished for 400 years. I think my ancestors, moved to this little island around the time that Mozart died. It's always interesting to think what's going on in different places. But, so for 400 years we fished. It's a place that has at least 7 seasons. People like him, he's a fisherman, Frank Comden, still fishes in a small inshore fishery. It's a place of codfish. And, I don't know who said this, but it's the right thing. The most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. And so for the people of Fogo Island, the most important thing was always the fish and taking care of the fish. And if you take care of the fish take care of you. And so it's a very powerful place to be. It presses up against you all the time. And I think one of the big differences between, this is an urban-rural thing, in a place like this, you have to get over yourself because it presses up against you in such a way that it's very hard to be self-conscious. And I think that carrying place around in this powerful way is a perfect antidote to wants and to buying things. And so that little boat there, this is the kind of boat that people made a living with for 400 years. And of course, what happened with the collapse of the fishery is these little boats were no longer needed. So we're in the Labrador Current. The ice that you see, and actually coming up in the next picture, this kind of ice isn't from there. This is actually from Greenland. It comes down with the Labrador Current. And people use this to make a living as well. Herds of caribou. Like this ice came straight from Greenland. It's multi-year ice that comes with the Labrador Current. And with that, of course, comes the seal fishery. Another fishery that was a common resource that everybody took a little bit, nobody took a lot. And when the cod fishery collapsed, we started programs to find recreational uses for these little boats, because embedded in these boats are ways of knowing. And I think for the important thing is not even the knowledge. It's the way of acquiring the knowledge. And that's in these little boats, as an example. People still move houses there. So this is it. This is the most important thing. And this is the way we fished for 400 years, and then of course this happened. So after 400 years, it took exactly 30 years of this kind of fishing, mostly from draggers that came across the ocean. It took 30 years to bring the cod to the brink of extinction. And so you might say, so there you can see what's happened to the biomass of cod. It's still economically extinct, although it's not ecologically extinct, and there's good signs that it's coming back. And so what happened in Newfoundland, all of these kinds of buildings became useless, really. And so you can ask the question, well, so what? Why don't they all move to Gander, which is the nearest town, and get a job at McDonald's? I mean, why even bother trying to hold on? Well, obviously, I'm from the place. I'm deeply attached to the place. So for me, holding on is about love of those rocks and love of the knowledge that came from living on those rocks. But I think in this little example of an island that now has 2,300 people, not 6,000, I think that is the grain of sand from which we can learn a whole lot about the economic systems that are driving our lives. Because I think the question becomes, what are we optimizing for? We seem to be constantly optimizing for return on capital. And really, I would argue, this is not a crisis of fish. This is a crisis of economics, because we started to optimize for return on capital and not for community, and certainly not for fish. And so across Newfoundland, if you can imagine, 600 little communities moved like this. People just took their houses and we floated them to other places. There's a beautiful song about the Outport people, and one of the lines in the song is that they moved without leaving and never arrived. There's because that deep attachment to that rock, and not a political place, because really Newfoundlanders are generally anarchists anyway. You won't find any patriots in the place, but the deep attachment to the land and the seascapes. So this resettlement stuff. So in my childhood, this was what was going on, and this is the crisis of population. So what we've been doing, my brothers and I, with this foundation, is trying to grow another leg on the economy, basically. And to try and hold on. And of course, we can't hold on by cutting ourselves off from the world, so we're trying to hold on by reaching out, as strange as that sounds. And at the same time, trying to use economics, use financial models as a tool of culture. And in the very economic assets that we're creating, trying to build the culture into them, so that if you succeed economically, perhaps the culture gets floated with it. That's our plan. So let me show you how we are doing that. When we talk about capital, we spend an awful lot of time talking about economic capital and not nearly enough time talking about all these other really important forms of capital that have to do with community well-being. So we've tried to be mindful of all of this in our projects. So in architecture, we created some studios for visiting artists. And this is some of those. They're made of wood. They're all situated along the coast. The architect is Todd Saunders. He describes them as strangely familiar. I mean, they're now parts of our landscape. They're net new. The building techniques are the same as our traditional buildings, although the forms are definitely new. The herds of caribou don't really seem to like this building very much, and so the local people consider this one less successful. They used to go down there, but they don't go there anymore. This is what traditional buildings look like. This is the inn that Gareth talked about that just opened. There it is. The job of this inn is to tell the story of the whole place. It was built by local people. Most of the interiors were made on the island, so it's actually created quite a huge impact on the economy. In the making of this inn, we set some rules. One of the rules was we didn't want anything to be in the inn that came from places that didn't have basic labor laws or basic environmental protection laws. I have to tell you, that's a very hard thing to do, especially when you need to buy nails. But if you do need to buy nails like that, we found some in France. I can give you the supplier's name. So it holds the story of the place, so its job is to be part of the continuity. So we don't lose where we've come from, and it gives us kind of a platform for reaching out, but it's very much of the place. Like, this inn couldn't be anywhere else. And here we go, all the wild berries are commonly owned. That man's garden is on public land. This fish swims in public waters. And this is the inn. Hey, there's somebody we recognize. And the boat building traditions, like just to go and gather the wood. To build a boat, you have to start by gathering wood. You have to know what kind of wood to get, and you have to get the wood that grows underground. When Jim Edwards dies, hopefully we will have taught somebody else how to do that. Oh, the race is on the 20th of July, and if you want to come and sign up for the race, we still have slots. And so the tradition of making boats, of course, translates very well into making furniture. As one man very famously said on Change Islands, he said, any man can build the house, but not any man can build a boat. If you can build a boat, you can do anything. And so this is some of the pieces that have been created for the inn and made locally and with kind of the past built into them. And that's it. And so all of these places, like this place in particular, people lived here. So the people of the island know the stories of the people that lived here. And this place was resettled. This is actually an island off the coast of Fogo Island. But still, the stories and our imaginations come alive in this place. And I think a lot of Fogo Islanders who have left they will tell you, they have had to objectify their culture in order to hold on to it. And so you may have a song that reminds you, but you're not walking these ancient paths, and so you lose it. You actually, you water it down so much that it's become something else. So I think if you have a really close relationship with this fish, you're going to want less stuff. And if you want less stuff, that's a good thing. And so this is, for me, how I know who I am, is how I make meaning. And so separated from this kind of place, then I personally find that at least I fall prey to kind of a self-conscious way of being that doesn't end up in a good place. So my argument is we need to put place back in our lives, and the concept, I don't feel that I own any part of Fogo Island, but I do feel that it owns me, and I have duties to that place. And I'm going to end with this, I don't know if you know Barry Lopez, Arctic Dreams. It's a remarkable book. It's a lot to read, but I think it's worth reading. Anyway, I would argue that without place, we do live in a stifling ignorance. And Roger, I know you're going to disagree with me.
I disagree strenuously. I'm actually going to wait. I have some pictures too, but I'll show them sometime later. Because you really plunged right into it. It's not that I don't approve of what you're doing on Fogo Island, but there are some concepts there that I really seriously disagree with. And you gave me all the keywords too. You mentioned continuity and the fact that you feel that the place owns you. And this is really, it makes me think of, we were talking about this earlier, about the German term Heimat, which I don't think there's an English word for it, because it means not only home, not only the place where you come from, but it also implies roots. And in the German, it's a very uniquely German word, and it implies roots that are bound to the earth, to the soil or the rock in your case, and to the culture and to the society of your peers. And it's the place where you belong. but
Belong to.
well, it's the place you belong to, and exactly, and we're going to get to that later,
Yeah.
which is my pictures are. I have a point to make there, but it's to shorten it. I think the place you belong is an individual choice. I can say I belong here, but in order to belong to a place, that implies exactly that cultural continuity. That the place actually has a claim on you, and in order to belong to a place, you've entered into a sort of an unspoken contract to perpetuate the idea of this place as Heimat for yourself and for others. And to me, essentially that's a very reactionary and a heterocentrist and a very confining cultural concept. It reminds me, another German, there's a couple of wonderful German words.
I'm going to have to learn German if we're going to keep arguing for the rest of our lives.
No. There's only 2 more German words. And these are German, really swear words. And one of them is Heimat. Yeah, well, not swear words, but it's heimatlos. Heimatlos is a terrible thing to say to someone in Germany because it says you're rootless, rootless, shiftless. You're not bound to the earth. And another one, which interestingly enough was 2-3 weeks ago, is a Vaterlandsloser Verräter, which means a traitor who has no fatherland. Yeah, and this sounds like something out of a past century, but in point of fact, was used like 2 weeks ago. There was a debate in the German parliament, and a Green Party member accused the German economics minister of being a Vaterlandsverräter. Interestingly enough, he has Asian roots. And so this is not only, it's also a racial slur, but this, and when I heard that, when I heard that, I realized how far away, how very different from this debate or from a general consensus I consider myself, because I consider myself both a Heimatlos and a Vaterlandsverräter, and Vaterlandsloser Verräter. I'm both of those things, and I am cheerfully and consciously both of those things. And this idea of belonging to a place is something that not only do I not know it from growing up, but it's also something that seems to me takes away a lot of your personal choice of creating environments for yourself. I grew up, Gareth mentioned it before, I grew up my father made spark plugs, and you always make, and it's
Very Very useful.
They are very useful, yes. And it's an industrial job. It's fairly labor intensive, and you make them in places where there's need for automobiles and where there's no labor laws, and
not buying your
low
spark plugs.
wages and no unions is the place where you want to make these things. And so we moved around a lot, and I didn't grow up in one single place. We moved every 3 to 5 years. And so at a very early age, I belonged to not a place, but a set of it was always focused on people. It was my parents and a growing set of people that I met and that started forming my home, meine Heimat, which is a virtual, which is more of really a virtual place that was not connected to a place, and I think the second, I think.
And you're saying that's a good thing.
I think that's a good thing, yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess I am saying it's a good thing. You know, it's my history, just as your history is yours. And I never much missed it either. I would have to lie. And the second thing is that when I was thinking about this talk tonight, you know, growing up as a gay man, there's always this idea, and I'm sure lots of gay teenagers have this, that they don't fit into the normative standards of their society. And so you tend to seek out, and so even this, so here we are, we've already established we're looking for a virtual community, and even this virtual community is not inclusive. And so I think I personally started creating artificial worlds, an artificial home, an artificial community, and it was a virtual Heimat. And while this is a very personal take, because I had to, yes.
Because you had to, right.
But it's still a good thing. I have no regrets about my life. You know, this is a very good thing. And I also think that it's not a very uncommon thing. I think it's as we're moving towards a globalized world, and people are moving into cities, and are not rooted in the earth, in the soil anymore. So I think it's belonging to a place is perhaps a concept of the past. It's belonging is something that you choose, and it's you're talking about. I wrote it down earlier. When we talked earlier, you said sometimes I have to give myself up completely, and then I really belong. Then I belong to the island, and this idea of negating the self, of completely negating your individuality. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm talking about, which is empowering yourself so that you form a community with other people that have empowered themselves, and so that your sense of place is really secondary. It's a physical phenomenon, but the actual community, the sense of place, is virtual. It's a state of mind. And it's something also ephemeral and personal and momentary.
Well,
so I have clearly a different view of
yes,
place.
I would argue that you arrived at that relationship with place out of necessity because of your own personal history. And I think the thing to be clear about, the community of people that I grew up with on this island, and I'm still very attached to on this island, is a very deeply rooted, long-lasting community. I mean, I have relationships with people that have been dead for 200 years that are from that place. But what we share is the place, and that sharing of place and sharing of common resources and resolving difficulties around the sharing of resources. That's what's given rise to the culture of the place. And there is no question times when that feels confining. And you know, it's interesting you talk about, you know, being a gay man and how that can be a problem in certain societies. I have two gay brothers, and one of them, who's gone now, but he's in my community on this island, is the community of things. He spent all of his time on the hills, and on the hills where he felt very much at home and very much part of the place, and couldn't reconcile his relationship with the people of the place because they weren't, he didn't fit into that, but he certainly felt at home in the place. Because the place, this is the beautiful Mary Oliver poem, I can't remember the name of the poem, but she talks about finding our place in the family of things. You know, and so if we optimize just for place within the humanity, I think that becomes very egocentric, and pretty quickly we end up buying too many things. Somehow, I think it takes us, without the whole, we're too big in the picture. If we take place out, well, first of all, who's going to take care of place?
I would object to the notion of egocentricity when you're applying it to my concept. But I think the problem that I have with your approach is that you are, through the foundation, you're proposing it as a model to be followed.
For other rural places, as an economic model for do we have to wait on Fogo Island for some industry, for some corporation to come and create jobs? Or can we do something that a community itself can own an economic asset? That's a potential model where whatever results in terms of hopefully surpluses.
Do you acknowledge that the actual, cities are growing? People are moving away from the countryside, are moving into cities. They're moving away from the place, away from places. They're moving away from the soil. They're breaking these roots, and they're moving into cities, into new high-rise. Maybe I'm an architect and urban planner, so I'm perhaps not quite the most objective person to ask about this. But they're moving to new developments, and they're forming exactly the kind of communities that I'm talking about. And to me, it's always, there was another German word, I'm sorry, Stadtluft macht frei, city air makes you free. This is, the city, moving to the city and leaving behind the bonds of the earth, that is empowerment, and it's something that's happening in our globalized world all the time. It's happening on small scales. If I'm a dirt poor farmer out somewhere in Brazil and I move to the favela in Rio,
you're free.
I am totally free. Yes,
as long as you have something to eat.
Yes, but I'm going there because to improve my lot. Yeah? Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. Let's just assume that for the sake of argument.
Okay.
I'm going there to improve my lot, and so I don't. So I'd say I don't know. Do you think that your model is it restricted solely to rural areas? Because to me, it seems that it is.
No, it isn't. I mean,
it's not a useful model for a society of free individuals.
Well, I disagree with you, because I think it's easier to see it in a small place, particularly an island, to see how this model could work. But there's no reason that, in fact, maybe there are examples of this. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but take the place in Brazil where you have these monster buildings of people living in there's one, the very famous one. Those people could actually form a business in some kind of cooperative format that helps sustain them through the economic activity that they engage in. So that can work. The point of it, there are several points to it, but one is, I think it's dangerous to assume that economic assets have to be owned by distant capital owners. And so it can actually be owned by a community on Fogo Island, a community in a slum outside of any city, anywhere. And so that part of it
Not really.
Why
no,
not?
not really.
Why not?
No, that works in a small rural area, and even there it doesn't work, because the modern urban societies are completely dependent on the division of labor, and this mono labor idea in your community. People do like 3 or 4 things. Either they fish, or they now work at the inn, or they provide. I'm sure there's.
I think there's a little bit of a
I'm sure there's like a handful more,
Yeah.
but there's not a lot. And in a big city, it just doesn't work that way. And you couldn't survive that way, because you need to. No, you can't survive that way, because you can't have a mono-functional society in the midst of a complex industrial society.
You absolutely can. You can have the ownership of capital not be distant and not be anonymous. You could go out and create a business park tomorrow that has all kinds of activities in it, where people get together and say, okay, we're going to own the results of our labor. That's absolutely transportable to an urban setting.
Okay.
But I think there are 2 points. The point that I want to go back to, though, is to say your argument is that human beings are healthy and perfectly fine and are not in need of a relationship with the natural world.
I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying perhaps they are in need of a relationship with the natural world, but it can very easily be one that they choose. It should not be one that they are enslaved to. And your model, if you'll forgive me for saying this, is one of perpetual enslavement.
Well, not really.
That just doesn't seem very attractive to
I
me.
choose to go to live at home. I have 6 brothers that don't choose that, but they still belong to that place, and they will tell you that they do, and it informs who they are as people. And when they are in trouble, they go sit on the rocks there and figure it out. But they choose not to live there. I choose to live there because, and not everybody needs to, but I think it's important to hold on to the continuity. It doesn't make it's not for everyone to go and do that, but it's good that we do because these places hold the history, they hold the learnings from the past, they hold the stories. I mean, otherwise, attachments, was it the Astor Gates? Detachable attachments. I mean, I think we need a variety of attachments in our lives, some that are detachable. Human relationships break down all the time. Our virtual little communities collapse and we're adrift again for a while. Maybe we would be better if we had a combination, but we have some attachments that are not detachable. And the ones to place and the ones to history, though that's how at least works for me, and maybe not necessary for you, where you feel and experience time and learnings and the learnings of place. I mean, I think that the other part of the thing is we think we know everything, and we know, like, we live on the surface of the earth without learning from it every day. You know, living in administered places that are flattened by humans, we're missing huge opportunities to learn. And I mean, this is a wild place. And I was talking earlier to someone about Paul Thoreau said, you know, hope. As long as there's wilderness, there's hope. Whereas, you know, the world of man, we just administer. And then what do we eat eventually? Who's going to take care of the fish?
Okay, well, if you're going to mention Thoreau, I've always liked the idea that, which he also propagates. I admit that his protagonist fails dismally, but you know, in Mosquito Coast, he goes into the desert because he has the idea that the amount of artificially produced ice and the amount of artificially produced cold is equal to the height of civilization. So the more artificial cold, and he goes and builds an ice cube factory up in the Amazon. Of course, it fails dismally because they don't need this.
Yes.
But I had always, maybe I read it wrong, but I'd always thought it totally fascinating that bringing this artificial climate into the ocean, into the Amazon, the jungle, was a very interesting concept of civilization, because we've conquered the last.
Right.
We've conquered the last. Yeah, the last vestige of nature, which is, you know, we build houses, we build rooms, and now we control the environment. And if we do that in a remote place, we've really taken over. We've taken over
completely.
And by that logic, like shopping malls in suburban Mississippi would be the height of civilization because they're air conditioned down to 50 degrees. So I'm saying that I know there's a flaw in that. But
yes. Yeah, a few.
I'll admit that.
And so back to the model, I think it's about economics, but it's about an economics that has at least an awareness of the implications for nature built into it, and the implications for community built into it.
But you're romanticizing a lack of change.
No, Fogo Island has probably changed more than Vienna has. We are the incredible adapters. The amount of change, and we do take and have taken for 400 years, I mean, people of the sea do this anyway, we've always been connected. It's not an isolated place. It's just that what comes in from the outside is, let's say, processed through the lens of this very powerful geography, so it isn't fully, it doesn't flatten us. I think the geography helps us hold on to the specificity of our culture, of who we are, or how we know, how we make meaning. And so, it's, you know, in Canada we have this plague of donut chains called Tim Hortons. And
Great
so
places.
Yeah, great places. And so, you know, little plastic buildings that some of your colleagues in the architecture world, somebody must have designed them at some point. And they're everywhere. And we have this joke on Fogo Island, what are we going to get at Tim Hortons on Fogo Island? And what would happen if we got one? And that whole debate about, you know, would it make us less as a people, isn't it, or as a culture, or as a place? And of course, it's about scale. If you get Tim Hortons and then comes all the rest of them, what we will have lost is the joy of the specificity of place. Like, I don't think it's not, I mean, I'm not arguing that Fogo Island is such a special place. It's such a specific place, and there's joy in the specificity. And if we can find alternate business models to say we can prosper and be part of the modern world, but not necessarily buy into the parts that are so flattening, not just with architecture, but with the way employment is structured and where the returns go, then that's a potential model.
It's interesting you should say that about specificity. I don't, because that's not something that I would have attributed to Fogo Island. It's a beautiful island, no doubt about it. It personally looked to me a lot like the Outer Hebrides.
That's because you didn't stay long enough.
But specificity,
Yeah.
as I understand it, is something that's connected to civilization. And this is my personal take, and again...
And we are very much part of civilization. I would argue
well, but the
very much
specificity
part.
you're talking about refers to nature, to the soil, to the rock.
No, I'm talking about specificity of how human beings express themselves architecturally, or how a man builds a boat is very specific to that place, adapted to that place. That's the joy of, if you go and learn to build a punt on Fogo Island, it's nothing like anybody ever built in the Outer Hebrides. It's a completely different thing that has been adapted to that specific geography. And that to me is a source of joy.
Okay, then why do you find it necessary, these punts? These punts have been around for a long time, but they're not the most ideal shape for a boat. A Boston whaler is surely the much better boat. And you know, it rides the waves better, it's much safer, you can't sink it. Why is that so much preferable? And how is that not romanticizing a lack of change?
Well, first of all, the knowledge in how to build that boat is fascinating, and we can take that knowledge and apply it to other things, which we have done, such as furniture, for example. And it's about the knowledge that's in it that makes it special. And I would actually argue with you, have you ever been on a Boston whaler in the North Atlantic? Not nearly as well adapted to those heavy seas because they're not heavy enough. These boats are perfectly adapted to that particular geography. And we don't have to wait for somebody on the other side of the world to make one. When we need one, we go make one. And it's about kind of just a little bit of self-reliance and the knowledge. So Roger and I are going to keep this up until one of us dies.
I'm going to show you some pictures.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Just a little comment. Very interesting if I make a link to Thomas. I don't know if he's still here. Because for me, you represent a bit the guy between 2001 and 2008, sort of 7 years of prosperity. And for me, kind of a retro belief in the city and, you know, in the virtual. And fair enough, because that's your story and also that's what kind of you believe in. You, on the other hand, believe in this kind of alternative, not away from the system, so to speak, but to make it better a little bit. I really like this idea of the Fogo Island and what you do. I hope it's not too successful because there might be a risk that suddenly Walt Disney knocks and says, I want to buy it. Or people who host the Olympics see this as a model for a little deprived neighborhood such as Islam to see, oh, that's a good business model, so to speak. I'm not against business, and it's very important the way how it's done. But this is just my little comment in terms of what you believe and what you believe, no? And neither or. I mean, your way is fair enough, and your way is fair enough. So it's very funny to observe this discussion because it doesn't lead anywhere. You think the city is better, and you have your virtual thing, and then you have your Fogo Island, and that's the better thing.
True.
But you know, neither nor. I mean, of course it's you know, cities grow, and of course it's not true that the place doesn't matter. You just have to think about water. There was a fantastic documentary about privatizing water. If you think about the sea level, how can you think not about the place? On the other hand, how can you sort of make a new model for a community in order to make a kind of, you know, local business, or how you know, even this place, because your model could be applied to East London before the Olympics, if you want. So, so in order to overcome this counterproductive discussion and just to say, oh, oops, what can we learn from each other? Is maybe yes, of course, it might be possible a model like yours if it's not too successful. And it still will go on for maybe a long time to, you know, cities will grow. It doesn't mean that it's better to be in a city, but for me the more interesting question is to let it happen. Yeah.
Okay, I am quite capable of looking at things in a more differentiated way, and maybe. Okay, I think you're right, but I certainly don't believe. I think this reference to the 70s and the cities of the 70s, then maybe you misunderstood. I don't.
80s, sorry, 2001 and 2008, so 7 years of prosperity.
Oh, okay.
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 But also I simplified just to my defense.
Maybe I'll give you. I have some very quick slides here. As Garrett mentioned in the beginning. One of the projects I'm involved in is the square around where my office is in Berlin, and it really ties well into this idea of specificity and how we can create in an urban environment our own kind of community and actually change things on a very local and immediate level and still in an urban context. This is in Berlin. Do I have a light here? Yeah. This is in Berlin, the Rosa-Luxemburg-Platz. This is the Volksbühne. I don't know if any of you know it. It's this Torstraße. It's becoming very popular right now. And this was in the 15-16. There was a big competition, and Hans Pölzig won it, and he built a number of these buildings here. In the war, a lot of these buildings were destroyed, and now there's empty lots. And we are fortunate enough to be able to work on a number of these lots. And I have a client who has assembled a lot of people on the square who rent spaces, who own spaces, who have started businesses there. There's a lot of galleries. She rents out apartments to artists for very low prices. There's lots of bars, and all chosen by her. And it's essentially a curated kind of situation that is doing exactly what I was talking about earlier. It's a group of people, and it's a blatantly commercial exercise. You know, there's nothing grassroots about it. But there's a group of people that are working together to change this particular quarter by working slowly on every building. And our office is involved in one sense in that we're planning a number of buildings. We did this building, and then we are working on a number of other buildings here. And all of these are buildings for arts, for studios, for galleries, and for a publishing house. And so we're creating, this is the one building that we've already built, and then we have another one that we're planning. A lot of these projects are in various stages, and they're not really ready to be shown yet, but I brought them anyway. So this is one building that we're building on the other side, which is a publishing house. And then, oops, we go back. We're planning a little building here for graphic design offices, which is at a very early sort of stage. And then we are planning another little building. This is where our office is, and we're planning a little building here, which is actually changed now. It's a studio space. It's going to be a gallery and some studios for another gallery that is here on the square, and it's going to move there. And this is actually an older project, which was an art project with Michael Beutler, which is also happening, which is not happening on this site anymore, but which is now happening on another site here. And all of these projects are, some of them are very commercial and some of them are more clearly in the art world, but to me, they constitute something that I feel very connected to. And not only because I'm the architect, but a lot of the people that are working with us together here are starting to develop a very close connection to this place. And this connection to this particular place has a lot to do with all of us being there together and working on it together. And it's a fluctuating group that changes and grows, and some people move away, but it has a core of people, and it's sort of a clique, I wouldn't call it. It's just a group. It's a large group of people, and we've created this very specific place. And I think the buildings will remain after we leave, but the specificity of it is really there only now, as all of us are sitting there and working, and there's the galleries, and the buildings are being used as we have planned them. And, we don't really know what's going to happen in 40, 50 years after I'm gone. This place is gone. It's gone, and the specificity that we knew will also be gone. And it's not even interesting to prolong it. It's a thing that we've chosen to create, and which will not exist anymore after we're gone.
But when in the creation of it, what are you optimizing for? Who's it for? What's it for? I mean, do you create things in a way that you think are beautiful, or what are you primarily optimizing for?
That's a good question. We're doing it because we all want, because we have an idea of the kind of place where we want to live and work in. And so we and the client, as the client is a developer, there's nothing altruistic about it. But we, for example, we're now looking for this publishing house. And we don't know if it's going to work yet, but this is something we want those kind of people on the square. We want to meet them in the cafes. Here's the cafe, and there's just one opening here. That's the kind of place where we want to live. It's the kind of environment we want to have, and the kind of environment we want to live in. And that's how we do it. It's really that basic. And people who join this group, people who move there, are the people who share that idea. And a lot of people don't share that idea. They don't stay. Yeah, they can move to Fogo. No, but this is what I mean by these constructed and artificial environments. And I think this is something that the city is about. But as the city changes, this kind of specificity will be gone. And I personally have no longing for a specificity that endures much longer over my demise. And I don't see why that would be desirable.
Maybe this would be a time to get a couple last questions in. I know there's a lot of them here. I know, Heinrich, you'll be next.
The studios on both sides look very good.
Excuse me?
Either on Fogo Island and either on the public place. But what should the art represent on Fogo Island?
Sorry, I didn't hear the
So
question.
what does the art represent? What does the art represent on
The
island?
the art, sorry.
This
Yeah.
is not a discussion between Dorian Gray and Henry Thoreau, that's right. But what should the art represent?
So on Fogo Island, the reason we started the project with the studios and with the residency program was a belief that art is another way of knowing. You know, it's if people who are artists are going to come and spend time working on the island and producing on the island, that's a net increase in the capacity of the community as a whole. It adds to the output and the creative output of the community. And of course, the thing that happens pretty much spontaneously on the island is the people who've been there fishing, people who've been there for a long time, become very involved with the people who are visiting and who are artists. Things come of that wouldn't happen. Conversations come, ideas come that wouldn't happen on Fogo Island without the artists having come and been part of the community for the time they're there. So the design of the whole project just intended nothing more than more ways of seeing and knowing to be present on the island.
I have to chime in now. And I know we've had, that was one time where we really almost came to blows because I think that's a very valid question. What are the arts doing there? And one thing I asked Zita once, if there was not this element of this noble savage about it, that the islanders were presented to the artists as being these original of the earth people are confronted with this highly intellectualized artist, because as the artist studios are not actual studios where you can really do work, that you can do work, but you can do work, but they're mainly they're geared towards conceptual art because they're like really difficult to get to, and you can write stuff there, and they're beautiful. So, you know, it works really well. But I think that's
You must not have seen Soka's 30-foot paintings.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah. But I think that's a very valid question of how does the art fit in there.
Well,
And
that's for the people who come to practice their art to figure out. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the people who live making a living from the sea have a very particular way of knowing. That people who've come from away, who are a lot of them are conceptual artists, have a way of knowing that maybe they're complementary in some way, and maybe they're not. But nonetheless, it makes for a much more interesting community, and it makes for another way for the community of Fogo Island to be in some way connected to the world that isn't through getting a donut franchise to come.
But couldn't that also be a nice way to sort of tie this quickly to Thomas Bernhard, like the reason we're all here, right? So you're saying in terms of the place of the arts on the island, but don't we have a question here that I think there's something that's, whether urban, whether rural, doesn't matter, common between you two is you're not really sure exactly what the community thinks. Or I mean, I know, Roger, one of your buildings is kind of controversial. I know there must be somebody on Fogo who thinks this is maybe not the best idea. I'm sure there's one or two. But I mean, look at Bernhard as, I'm going to try to be like Roger and drop a German word, which will be dangerous because I don't know any German. But I mean, wasn't Bernhard often called, what was it, a Nestbeschmutzer? The bird that messes its own nest.
Fits in
So I mean, we're talking about belonging, but that we're making assumptions about the community that wants to belong to, but also both of you seem to also like what you belong to. Neither of you are criticizing in that same way that Bernhard would criticize where he's from, or sort of look at tradition and name tradition and say, maybe tradition is something we don't need. Maybe the past is just past. Maybe we should move past it.
I think that's something that, I think that's definitely something we can agree on, that there is a longing to belong. However you define it, and however you define for yourself belonging or belonging to, I think we all have that longing to belong.
Makes us buy stuff sometimes too that we shouldn't buy, that longing. It does. I think, how much of the past you carry with you, I don't think you get to pick and choose. I don't think you can drop it. It's there anyway. And as far as the community on Fogo Island and their reactions and what they think about the presence of artists on the island, it's for sure varied. I would say the most common question is, what's it for? Who's it for?
Well, but Zita, that's exactly my point. You can pick and choose. Excuse me. That's.
No, you can choose to pay attention to it or not, but it's there anyway. You're not escaping the past.
Okay, I think we have one last really quick question. You've been trying really hard to ask. So. Oh, okay, I just asked it, apparently. So maybe we'll end it there, if that's okay. So thank you guys very much. This was really a lot of fun. I like
Roger
listening
and I
to
will
you
take it to the bar.